Thank you for clicking on this video. Today, we'll be looking at how identity politics play out in the UK landscape and how Labour and the Conservatives, the two major parties, engage with it, especially the Tories, as they're the ruling party. I also want to talk a bit about the definition of identity politics itself and how it extends beyond the hollow media buzzword of derision that it's come to be. Having been a central aspect of the political landscape in this country for a very long time, although perhaps it's a bit controversial applying it to anything before the 70s. I also want to challenge the woefully incomplete yet very popular understanding that we got to where we are today in society through parroting the United States, the implication here being that it's unnatural to British society and should therefore be rejected altogether, because this notion dismisses centuries of the UK's global and internal dynamics. So, the technical definition of identity politics is fairly broad and possibly obvious. Politics or affiliation with a social or political cause based on identity. The term can span across anything from feminist movements and civil rights all the way to ethno-nationalism and the factions drawn up during a civil war. The term was first used by an American black feminist socialist group back in 1977. Historically, out of the two major parties, Labour have been the one associated with black people and other ethnic minorities, and they are traditionally viewed as being the most aligned with our interests. They are, after all, the party who introduced a number of laws banning racial discrimination, and most high-profile black politicians over the decades have been Labour, including a number of first black this and first black that's, like Diane Abbott, who still retains her seat in Hackney North and Stoke Newington after gaining it during that fateful 1987 election, or Marvin Rees, who recently became the first black mayors of Bristol. Labour are also the party who is by far the most reliant on black and ethnic minority votes. 15% of the votes they receive, compared to just 3% of Tory votes and 5% that go to the Lib Dems. 2017's general election saw the highest voter turnout in 20 years, conspicuously coinciding with Jeremy Corbyn's candidacy. That year also saw a spike in black votes, almost all going to Labour because of him. On the other hand though, the Conservatives have not been linked to black people, to say the least. Their pro-establishment, anti-immigration, pro-imperialist stances have been among their central tenets since forever. And a lot of people would describe the party as, well, frankly, racist, which is part of their appeal. At any rate, their persona is very anti-identity politics, anti-liberal agenda, anti-wokeism, and all the other words that the Daily Mail uses to radicalise their readership. This all being said though, since the 19th century with Robert Peel embracing industrialism or Benjamin Disraeli passing legislation granting the vote to working class men in England and Wales, the Conservatives have also been known for experimenting with the zeitgeist in order to retain power, no doubt contributing to them being considered the most successful political party on the planet, with over 60 of the last 90 years being theirs. In the years following their ascent to power in 2010, the Tories have also increased the number of ethnic minority politicians in their fold and have gone on to beat Labour to having the most diverse cabinet in history, including very high-profile figures like Chancellor Rishi Sunak or Home Secretary Priti Patel. Adding to this increasingly diverse profile of the likes of Kemi Badenoch, Tony Sewell, and one-time London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey. Speculation over who will take over from Boris, should he ever actually step down, have included imaginings of the first brown PM looking at the likes of Rishi Sunak and Priti Patel, and their seniority is seen as a collective win for all us babes.
How many black people are in the current cabinet?
There's a whole series of people from a black and minority ethnic background. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Home Secretary, to name but two.
I'm talking about black people specifically, so that's why I was specifically asking about how many black people there are in the current cabinet.
Two most diverse cabinets I've ever sat in. Right at the top of government, people from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. Kwasi Kwarteng was sitting around the cabinet table with me. I think that Boris Johnson has got a very good record on this and listens to a diversity of views, and it's diversity of thought that's the really important thing.
Move your blood clot!
Also, as much as they claim to be above identity politics, the Tory approach isn't even all that colourblind, with the likes of Badenoch's main position being one of racial contrarianism despite being, the Equalities Minister, or Patel having orchestrated the extradition of 3 British Sikhs to India through her special relationship with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his right-wing Hindu Nationalist Party, a relationship I'm riskily going to assume wouldn't be possible if she herself wasn't of Indian Hindu descent, given, again, Modi is a right-wing ethno-nationalist. A large part of Tony Sewell's entire career can be summarised with him addressing black people directly to tell us that we're wrong actually, and also that single parents are the devil. Mind you, he's not that different from his Labour counterpart Trevor Phillips, who did more or less the exact same thing during his time with New Labour, among other things. When it comes to actively trying to attract black voters though, neither cares that much or makes that much of an effort. I've already talked about how much Labour relies on black votes, and while there are individual politicians who connect with their black constituents, the party itself takes these votes for granted. This has not gone unnoticed by the Tories, who, while being racist as hell, are, like I said, opportunistic in pursuit of power. Observing the latest Tory rebrand, having gone from this to a few decades later having the most diverse cabinet ever, while simultaneously being one of the most racially hostile, has been curious to say the least. Badenoch, challenging the near unquestioned support Labour gets from black voters, addresses us with the whole, you don't need to limit yourself to Labour's low expectations, choose us instead. Sean Bailey, a working class black man, which is already a rarity in British politics, talks a lot of his class, his single parent upbringing and his brushes with the law in his youth, and he finished the capital's mayoral race with 45% or nearly 900,000 votes, although I must say the boroughs with the largest black populations remain steadfastly Labour. In a lot of ways, he is emblematic of those whose support Labour ordinarily takes for granted, which he definitely factors in his emphasis on choice, not unlike Badenoch. The Tories are trying to capitalise off Labour's extreme complacency about both the black vote and their long-suffering politicians. While out of the two, the Tories might be the ones traditionally associated with racism, Labour is no saint, and its internal problems with anti-blackness have not gone unnoticed by the black electorate either. I'm no fan of Bailey, by the way, but one last mention of him. In 2010, Labour MP Emma Dent Code was forced to apologise after calling him, quote, a token ghetto boy whose public school buddies will drop him like a hot potato. She actually ended up being right about the second thing that she said. He was one of the few people who had to quit when it was found out that he was breaking lockdown rules. So I wasn't surprised either, and I don't think anyone else was really all that surprised. To be honest, they're both trash. They're both racist. Screw both of them. What was I saying? Oh yeah, Labour's laziness when it comes to courting black voters and their problems with anti-blackness. In 2020, the party's black MPs had to write an open letter regarding their concerns with the continued delay of the Ford inquiry, which was set up in the aftermath of a leaked report on allegations of racism towards black members. The likes of Shadow Cabinet member Jess Phillips, a favourite in the theatre of feminist identity politics, and her persistent misogynoir towards Diane Abbott is one example of the multiple high-profile Labour figures who are openly hostile and at the very least indifferent towards black people. In general, there's been a long history dating back to at least the 70s of internal pressure to step away from marginalised groups for fear of alienating their white working class core. And to be honest, this is not unfounded, but more on that in a bit. For now though, it's fairly clear that Sir Keir Starmer is making an attempt at clawing them back in his silence whenever something happens to one of his black MPs, in writing for The Sun, and in his failure to condemn the recent proposal to ship asylum seekers to Rwanda, among many, many other things.
Like Keir, my wife works in the NHS. If anyone was to insult her, I would hit him just like Will Smith did at the Oscars. Would Sir Keir do the same?
Anybody who insults family members excites something quite emotional in all of us. But on the other hand, to go up and hit someone in that way is wrong, I'm afraid. I was struck by the fact that it didn't appear to me to be completely spontaneous, but he sort of walked on quite calmly and then hit someone. I'm sorry, for me that's the wrong side of the line.
In 2019, the Conservatives received a record-breaking number of votes, no doubt a reaction to the previous 2017 election, which saw one of the highest overall turnouts, coinciding with Corbyn's candidacy. Generally, non-white votes for Labour have been falling gradually since the New Labour era of 1997, which was overtly anti-immigration and pro-criminalisation of racialised communities, being responsible for, among other things, everything that Jack Straw and David Blunkett did during their respective stints as Home Secretary. In a post-Corbyn era, Labour have been very open in wanting to return to a new Labour model. I just touched upon voting, but to be honest, political apathy is a significant issue in the UK. I've mentioned a couple of times already that 2017 saw the highest voter turnout in 20 years. That was with 69% of eligible voters, meaning that 31% abstained for some reason. Digging into the data a little bit, Engaged voters are more likely to be older and loyal to the Conservatives, and there are regional differences in levels of engagement as well, with the north of England, Scotland and Northern Ireland being particularly disenfranchised. The young and the non-white are also much less likely to be registered to vote. In 2019, data collected right before the most recent general election revealed that 25% of black people in Great Britain and 31% of mixed-race people were not registered, compared with just 16% of white people. This is not a new issue either, with Lord Simon Woolley founding Operation Black Vote in 1996 in an effort to engage more black and other racialised minorities to take part.
Figures unveiled by organisers of Operation Black Vote show that failure to register to vote was 4 times higher among ethnic minorities than the white population. The statistics are at their worst among young blacks. A Mori poll found that 24% of the black community were not registered to vote, and more than 50% were unlikely to vote, with an amazing 90% of young black men who won't vote. In political terms, the main parties are well aware that the black vote could decide who wins and who loses in many seats at the next election.
You can vote, but at the end of the day, hardly anything's going to change. No one really speaks about politics, so the young black people don't really know much about it.
They can't just come on television with their party political broadcast and think, that's good, I think I'll vote Conservative. They need to get in there, man. They need to get in the dirt.
It appears that with only 6 black MPs in the House of Commons, many among the black community feel that British democracy is failing them.
There's a deep sense of cynicism from many in our community, especially the young, towards the political parties. And so they've been saying, what's the point? I'm not getting involved. I don't think it has anything to do with laziness or apathy. It's disillusionment of the present system.
The non-white population also tend to be younger than the national average, and recent data from the Youth Democracy Index reveals, perhaps unsurprisingly, that young people do not trust politicians, with almost half side-eyeing the Tories and almost a quarter feeling the same way about the Labour Party. Reasons for this distrust include viewing society as greedy and corrupt, and the feeling that the government is unrepresentative, having only eyes for the rich and powerful. So, I'm not in the 18 to 24 age group, although only just. But a small personal moment here. I vote at every general election, not necessarily every local, but we move. But not necessarily because I believe my vote makes a difference or even for a passion for the process. Rather, it's been drummed into me from a very young age by a parent whose first introduction to feminism was learning about the suffrage movement and the likes of Emmeline Pankhurst. While her feminism has evolved since then, it left such an impression on her that it then left a very strong impression on me in terms of exercising one's right to vote, especially as a woman. This all said and done though, I'm not naive when I get to the polls. I don't actually feel like I'm making a difference. But at the same time, I know that people like to lie. I know that these hoes really love to lie just to get your little X next to their name. So I'm also probably not unusual in this respect. I'm really trying to push this video out kind of like now, because depending on how early I get it out, we're having local elections at the moment, and generally the turnout for those is even lower, mostly because people don't even really know how local politics functions. That being said though, pundits, analysts, etc. are going to be using this particular election to see whether they can guess just how numbered Boris's days are. But I don't actually feel like this election is going to be breaking any records anytime soon. I think apathy has probably got worse in the last few years, but we'll see. Maybe famous last words. The term identity politics is typically used with a degree of scorn, a synonym for wokeism or the liberal agenda, or alternatively making misguided political selections based on shared superficialities. Here, identity politics chiefly functions along the lines of race, gender and sexual orientation among others, with it generally being seen that whiteness is not engaged with in the political landscape. This, however, omits the very obvious examples of political camps formed along the lines of race, whiteness and ethnicity and nationality among those so-called native to these islands. So let's explore that now, shall we? The origins for these camps vary and go back as far as you like. Take the events following the 5th century Anglo-Saxon invasion and the dynamics with the Celts enduring to the present day, or the 12th century invasion of Ireland starting over 8 centuries of British colonisation which never ended. Or how about England and the historical back and forth between the north and south in terms of power, wealth and investment? Depending on how you define it, this line was drawn either with deindustrialisation in the 20th century or goes back even further to the 11th century Danelaw and possibly even earlier. These camps play a huge role in the British political and cultural consciousness and are openly incorporated into every aspect of the democratic process. We make light of the sheer volume of accents in this tiny country, but those accents and the fragmented politics they represent have seriously meaty histories with significant influence in shaping political activity in Britain. It does intrigue me how none of this is ever viewed or dismissed as identity politics. Among the most high profile of this form of identity politics is the independence movement in Scotland and their main party, the Scottish National Party, or the SNP. Present-day Scottish nationalism started to take shape in the 60s and 70s and didn't immediately pursue independence. A combination of Scotland's net gain from its imperial partnership with England and Wales, as well as having a high degree of autonomy from Westminster, meant that there was no real appetite for independence historically. But as the 70s ushered in deindustrialisation and the financial crisis, neo-nationalism emerged, opposing Tory neoliberalism infringing upon Scotland's socially democratic and egalitarian structure. This evolved into the view that the only way Scotland could protect its political autonomy was to become a separate state. While Labour had traditionally been the party of the working class across the UK, in Scotland many switched from Scottish Labour to the SNP during the 70s and 80s. Here, the working class were more politically united than in ever-fragmented England, where Thatcherism was taking hold. At the same time, Scottish Labour were increasingly viewed as deprioritising the working class, instead opting to chase power in Westminster. With this, protecting the working class and Scottish industry therefore started becoming synonymous with protecting Scottish identity itself. Notably, Scottish nationalism is not particularly isolationist. It's known for its pro-Europe stance, for example. The 2016 EU referendum saw Scotland vote 62% Remain, and they had the most uniform result out of the four nations. Many mainstream Scottish nationalists would actually be okay with retaining the 1603 Union of the Crowns and with keeping the pound. Much is also made of the social union, that is, the family relationships and professional networks within the UK, as Scottish people live up and down the country and vice versa. Ethno-nationalism features very little, although ethnicity and religion do have a degree of influence, looking, for example, at the dynamics among Catholics and Protestants in specific contexts, which unfortunately I won't have time to get into in this video. Speaking of ethno-nationalism, I now need to move away from Scotland and look at another prevalent form of identity politics, British nationalism and the far right. To explain the likes of the National Front and the BNP, I first need to go into painstaking detail about the history of the entire British political system. Alright, maybe not, but I do need to talk a little bit about fascism. British politics has for a long time been pretty binary, dating back all the way to infamous beefs like the Roundheads versus the Cavaliers or the Liberals versus the Tories. Briefly blundering our way through some European political science, about 100 years ago the two traditional radicalist opponents were the Communists and the Fascists. One thing about extremes in British politics is that there has always been room for the more politically viable centre for whatever extremes may exist. Okay, backing away from the political science now, fascism in Britain dates back to the 1920s when Rotha Linton Orman founded the British Fascisti in 1923 in support of Benito Mussolini's March on Rome in Italy, where fascism was invented, hence the faux Italian name. But wait, what even was fascism and how did it come to be in the first place? It's been said that it's easier to use than to define, so I'll be taking from Stanley G. Payne's widely used summary. Without giving you all the events that led up to this, basically, fascism emerged under Mussolini right after the First World War as the other main revolutionary force in Europe, the other being communism, which was born from the Russian Revolution. At its core, fascism maintained anti-Marxism, anti-liberalism, and also anti-conservatism, the unquestioned leadership of whoever's in charge, aka the leadership principle, a party army, and nationalistic totalitarianism. British fascism was mainly formed in opposition and reaction to communism, while also being pro-imperialism, anti-Catholicism, and anti-class struggle. The British fascists dropped the fake Italian because, you know, too ethnic, and in the early days were mainly made up of high-ranking military officers and members of the aristocracy. Not long into the 20s, however, on the back of clashes with communists, working and middle-class people would also be drawn to fascism. With them, they brought their own concerns, such as the decline in agriculture, and these concerns ended up becoming central tenets to the British fascist movement. After a few years is when we start seeing multiple breakaway groups, stemming from a lack of consensus on ideology and purpose. Sir Oswald Mosley, possibly the most notorious British fascist, was responsible for, among other things, the founding of the BUF, or British Union of Fascists. As World War II came around, fascism became less popular, and over the next 3 decades or so, various breakaways splintered off. In the late 60s, 3 of these groups, the League of Empire Loyalists, the Racial Preservation Society, and the British National Party, not to be confused with the more recent and well-known group of the same name, which I'll get to, merged to form the first mainstream far-right party in Britain, the National Front. The National Front came about in reaction to increasing numbers of immigrant communities in places like Smethwick and Southall, as white replacement propaganda targeted the white working class. Wanting to appear as more legitimate and respectable, they avoided public associations with neo-Nazis or militant groups, and their focuses were anti-communism, anti-immigration, and the expulsion of all non-white immigrants, as well as being supportive of all white minorities in South Africa and present-day Zimbabwe. Another 20 years down the line, it was time for these planks to splinter once again, as neo-Nazi John Tyndall formed his own political group, the British National Party, this one taking its name from the OG one. Tyndall had been the National Front's leader during the 1970s, but resigned because, as well as being racist, he was also homophobic, his exit being in opposition to the appointment of a gay fascist. While the National Front never got any further than a few elected councillors, the British far right finally had their moment in the mainstream when in 1993, the new BNP won their first seat in the House of Commons, the Isle of Dogs in Tower Hamlets, traditionally a Labour stronghold. A reaction to the area becoming more diverse, the BNP won this seat explicitly on the basis of defending white rights. After that, the BNP went on to have some small successes, including a persistent presence in Dagenham in the 90s and 2000s. In some ways, their ilk have never been a threat to the binary status quo, and the likes of the English Defence League, founded in 2009, are relegated to the fringe. A cobbled-together mass of everything from pro-establishment imperialists to organised crime football firms, the British far right have always lacked cohesion and have to rely on larger parties to keep them sweet in order to maintain a foothold in British politics. However, that reliance isn't without reward. Much of their politics align heavily with the Conservatives, and the EU referendum campaign rather notoriously took from far-right rhetoric and imagery. UKIP, a leading group in the Leave campaign, were founded along right-wing and populist lines, and in its time has been associated with multiple high-profile members of the far right. In the years since, it's arguable that the far right are currently enjoying greater legitimacy and freedom to act without backlash, and over the last decade, they've also been responsible for acts of terrorism, something that can fall within the definition of identity politics. Take the murder of MP Joe Cox as one worrying example. Convictions among the extreme far right have risen by a third, placing them as the second highest threat to domestic security in 2021. Which you'll know is ironic if you've watched my video on national identity and remember that the strategy was designed to explicitly target Muslim non-white communities. With that said though, the far right, comparatively speaking, enjoy a lesser degree of surveillance. In fact, less than even the likes of, say, the family of murdered teenager Stephen Lawrence, who was killed in a racist attack 29 years ago, or Celia Stubbs, the partner of anti-fascist activist Blair Peach, who was killed by a police officer during a clash with the National Front in Southall. Both the major parties have a long history of the extreme right. Linton Norman was an active Conservative member her whole life, using British fascist resource to canvass on behalf of the Conservatives. Multiple historic fascist members had also been Conservative MPs at some point in their careers. Mosley had been an MP for both the Conservatives and the Labour Party prior to spawning the BUF. In 1960, Southall, a Conservative Party member, led the local residents' association to successfully petition the Labour Council into acquiring a residential property in order to keep its ownership white and block it from being bought by Indians. This residents' association evolved to become what would be the Southall branch of the BNP. Within the big two, there are those that see it as practical, necessary even, to appease and assimilate far-right ideas, especially in indulging the idea that ethnic minorities are being preferred over the white working class, leaving them behind amid a landscape of scarcity. This being a major source of contention and splintering within the Labour Party over the last few decades, as I've touched upon. Still though, all things considered, the general view is that identity politics is a non-white or feminist etc. affair, with parties such as the Black Unity and Freedom Party, Taking the Initiative Party, or the Women's Equality Party, to name a few, formed explicitly along identity lines. Some examples are often criticised for being the result of foreign American influence, unnatural when applied to British context, and to be rejected at all costs. While the post-war era saw globalization and the aggressive expansion of the USA's military, political, and media influence around the globe, in Europe, Britain was by far the most influenced. And from the 1950s onwards, the looming and encroaching threat of so-called Americanization had become a cliche within social and political critique. Reasons for the acute influence in Britain vary, besides us, of course, speaking the same language. The country had been used to hosting a large number of Americans since the GI days of World War II. There were exchange programs between the two countries to prime the next generation of the political and professional class, including the future Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. It's common knowledge that American popular media flooded the British market. The idea of identity through performance emerged from 60s counterculture and was baked into radical movements. See Black Power, radical feminism, and gay liberation, and there was constant contact between activists on both sides of the Atlantic. The term identity politics itself, as I said earlier, was coined by a black socialist feminist group in the States. All of these factors interacted with pre-existing conditions within the UK, brought forward from the imperial era, and as I touched upon, even before then. Concurrently, Britain was attempting to reconstruct its own imperial self-image, having just undergone the rapid decline of its supreme institution, the empire. Generally speaking, Britain can be described as small c conservative in generally being against major shifts in the status quo. Even the main labour movement, which pre-exists Marxism, is generally pro-empire and doesn't challenge class hierarchy. The new wave of radicalism among black people, LGBTQ+ people, and women therefore made its way through to the public consciousness in a way that had never been achieved before and had never been seen before. We got there in the end, but zeroing in on black liberation in the UK, influence from American activists was of course significant. To start, many of the 20th century's black activists were either Caribbean American or spent significant parts of their political lives in the States, with the likes of Claudia Jones, Kwame Ture, George Padmore and CLR James bringing insights from both contexts. Marcus Garvey spent his final years in England, having once been prolific in Harlem, travelling there from Jamaica. Then you have the likes of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, having each made several trips to the UK in their time. Dr. King was actually a well-known and popular figure over here, having once delivered a sermon to thousands outside St. Paul's Cathedral and having attended events with high-ranking politicians. One of Malcolm X's final public appearances in the days before his assassination was to address the Smethwick community, which, as I'd said earlier, had become a breeding ground for the National Front. Early race relations legislation in this country was even based on American legislation and had to be subsequently revised. Since this time in history, the dismissal of identity politics as simple Americanization has served as a pushback against the threat to the status quo. However, history tells us that while American influence gave a language and framework for black people and others in Britain, it is inaccurate to gloss over the many figures in common each side of the Atlantic had, and a central role these people also had in the global anti-imperialist fight, themselves taking inspiration from events such as the rebellions in the Caribbean and from Francophone negritude, black consciousness, as well as black American liberation. It's also worth noting that while Americanization is not typically associated with concepts like the far right or white anxiety, they themselves have also taken heavily from American imagery and race rhetoric, especially evident in media and political discourse, with the adoption of coded language used in American coverage of racial tensions, ominously framing the things that were happening over there as the future of Britain. So, we've looked at what the term means and how it goes beyond the media itself, how the concept is employed by the two major political parties. We've also debunked the idea that it's just all American rubbish, and we've also looked at the different ways in which white identity shows up in Britain. I also wanted to look at the casual usage of identity politics to mean automatic affiliation based on assumptions. As Labour are increasingly finding out the hard way, taking someone's politics for granted based on their race or other characteristic, be it a member of parliament or public, is an increasingly dicey game. It's also why criticisms of the likes of Priti Patel that centre her parents' immigrant status, as if that's going to move her somehow, won't work and is frankly kind of tired. Even though I do get the temptation. First of all, her dad ended up becoming a UKIP councillor, so this rhetoric already rings hollow. People make exceptions to themselves, and even if they didn't, we can't deal in hypotheticals. Her family did settle here, their status is not up for question, and Patel is a senior member of one of the most racist governments in history, and looks after one of the most racist departments within that government. Indeed, before Sean Bailey, there was Labour's Chuka Umunna, who for a brief period was poised to become the first black candidate for Mayor of London, and I remember some getting excited and saying that they'd vote for him. Well, Umunna also belonged to the anti-immigration Blue Labour faction before eventually leaving the party altogether, but also the first black Mayor of London. Son of an immigrant, gets my vote, am I right? I can keep going with these examples, you get the point. The way the media use the term identity politics insinuates that people are coming at their politics with the same energy as when you're watching a TV show or a game show and you start rooting for the black person. Don't lie and say you don't do it, because you do. However, it's actually rare for anyone to do this when it comes to their politics, and if we do, then so too do the likes of those who choose their candidate based on whether they can picture themselves in the pub with that person. Haphazardly throwing the term around in this manner wasn't going to get past me without making a video about it. If you got this far, let me know what your understanding of identity politics is within your local context, especially if you're outside of the UK or the US. I want to know. I have no idea where this is going to go playlist wise, by the way. It was supposed to be a Black in Britain installment, but I haven't really talked about black people that much in this video. I'll figure it out. Anyway, thank you for watching.